Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of the Team Deacons podcast, a collection of informal conversations between Roger and James Deacons and a guest. We never know where the conversation will take us, so listen in and see where it goes. This episode is sponsored by Aperture and its new Storm XT52, the industry's most powerful LED point source light. Brighter than a 6K HMI and powered by Aperture's revolutionary Blair light engine, the Storm XT52 is both a tunable white light and also the brightest ever adjustable color LED. Storm XT52, unrivaled output, only from Aperture. This episode is brought to you by Picture Shop, whose colorists have created looks for many of the world's biggest films, acclaimed series, and celebrated independent and festival projects. Picture Shop is proud to be a creative partner to the artists behind the camera who trust us to help shape their final vision. Visit pictureshop.com to get in touch and mention Team Deacons for special rate consideration. Today we're speaking with a costume designer. Her credits include Hell or High Water, Train Dreams, and HAMNET. We're pleased to welcome MALGOSIA Turzanska. MALGOSIA, thank you for doing this.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'd like to start with our normal question, which is, how did you get to where you are today? Is this something that you wanted to do as a kid? Were you the best dressed kid on the block? Or was this something you found out later?
Yeah, and you were born in Krakow, right?
Yeah,
in Poland.
that's correct. Yes.
Yeah.
I was definitely not the best dressed kid on the block. My mom, because I was growing up still during the last years of communism in Poland, and my mom always had a knack of like making things nicer than whatever we could get. She would dye things. She would remake things. One of the fabrics that was available were diapers actually for kids, like the cotton old-timey diapers. And she would make skirts out of those diapers and dye them different tones. So I always knew this was possible. And yet I did not learn to sew until I was like 20, So it was, for whatever reason, it was never a part of my my growing up, like in myself. But I actually didn't know that costume design was a job until I was in high school. And I remember I was not prepared for a chemistry test. Ended up going to the movies because it was cold. Because I was like, I'm not going to school. I'm just running away. And went to the movies and saw Almodovar's Kika. And my mind was blown because this was truly the first time that I realized these are not clothes. What these people are wearing is something else. And someone figured this out. This is not... People didn't come wearing this, and this is not from a store. So that was my first like aha moment. And then I ended up going actually to study in Prague at DAMU, which is the theater version of FAMU, the famed film school. And it was both sets, or not even production design, but scenography and costume design for theater. Even though at this point I knew I wanted to make movies, but you had to go through the whole theater program in order to get to the film program. But while I was doing it, a friend of mine from the acting department, Vasha Kiracek, got a call for casting by Agnieszka Holland for her movie, and ended up being cast as the main role in a movie called Janosik, and very kindly told her about me and said, oh, there's this girl, she speaks English, she speaks Polish, she speaks Czech, and she wants to be in costumes. And they somehow, by a miracle, I got to be a part of that production, and I was Agnieszka's PA, and Kasia's, her daughter, also co-directed it. And I got to see a real movie.
Yes.
And just never looked back. That was it.
If that was your first movie, you must have learned a lot quickly, like the need for multiples or all those other things.
Exactly. And I was not in the costume department per se, but I watched, I learned what I could. And I also understood, because I was at that point studying both sets and costumes, and I realized that the production design aspect is not what I am good at. My focus was on the human scale and telling that story, and so that was crucial. That was crucial to how I went on after that. But
Yeah.
I was just very lucky. That's all that happened.
Do you think it's important for a costume designer to really know how to sew? And because it does help you know how fabrics work together and all of that, but would you say to someone who wanted to be a costume designer, you should learn to sew?
There's no rule. I think you can be good at anything, with any approach. It helps understanding the movement of fabrics, and it helps communicating with the team, and it helps understanding, especially since we're on your podcast, knowing what happens in different kinds of light with different kinds of fabrics. What is gonna move and pick up certain lights, what is going to disappear into darkness completely. So I feel like it is helpful. I don't know if it's crucial, but it is definitely helpful. And it is the same with sketching. I sketch, but I know a lot of costume designers who don't, who are able to communicate their ideas to the rest of the team without it. And it's just the way I grew up. And so that's, and I'm definitely not a great tailor, but it's, for example, with a movie like Train Dreams, where we had a very limited budget, limited time, a very small team, I had to make some of the things myself, and they are, they're crude, but they go with the story. They are, just, somewhat primitive, but they're there. I could do it on the weekend or after hours without having to rely on someone else. So that is also helpful that, you're a little bit more self-sufficient that way, especially on smaller things or as you're starting out.
Right.
Well, actually, while you're just talking about Train Dreams, can we just, what was your crew on that? How did you crew it? And how did you approach design, costume design on that film?
Also, I'm just curious, when you look at a script, do you look at it thinking, what can I make? Or do you say, what can I get already made? Because is that a better budget thing to get something already made as opposed to, I don't know, or make it? I mean, how? And so when you get a script like Train Dreams, were you thinking buying or making?
So it's the way I start, and again, this is, everyone has their own approach, but I start from the inside out. And so I start with a kind of very raw emotional response that very often has zero to do with the period and just has like a feeling. Sometimes it's color, sometimes it's rhythms or patterns, but I want to make sure that I understand the world, where the character is in and what happens throughout, and that I get it, just innately understand what is happening. So here it was, we were working with Alexandra Schaller, who's a beautiful production designer. And both of us understood that, we didn't have a lot to work with. This was a small budget and a huge scope of a story. We start in 1890s and we go through 1960s. So there's, you have to figure out a way of how to, in an economical way, show the passage of time without kind of being in your face and doing like a, greatest hits, that like going through the decades. But it was, it was about the connection to nature, about the nature changing. And Adolfo, the way Adolfo Veloso shot this movie, it was very much using natural light and kind of focusing on the nature part of it. And so that's kind of where we started, that kind of the clothing had to exist in the world, either disappearing into it and making sense within it, or kind of standing out a little tiny bit. And so I made as much as I could. I rented a lot of stuff, but like the yellow dress that was like a little bit of a standout piece that was made, and that was so much money compared to everything else. This was this was when I was buying it, it was like, well, if this doesn't work, this is gonna suck. And also it was a white, it was a white silk that I then ended up dyeing. And so I had, I was like, I have one go here. If I mess this up, then I don't know what we're gonna do. So I knew the special moments were going to be makes. And on this one, the thing that I cared about the most was the aging and dying and distressing and making sure that we feel the world on Grenier's costumes, that we feel he is like surrounded by, he has been surrounded by those woods for years and years and years. And there's like evidence of it on his collars, on his cuffs, on, just in general on his clothing. So that was the main focus there. And yet team-wise, because you asked about the team, we were, I want to say 1, 2, 3, like less than 10 people. It was like 7, I think 7 of main crew, maybe 8. Whereas on HAMNET, I had, multiples of that. So, which of course had its own challenges in its own way, but this was very, very tiny.
So just there's so many things I want to ask, but distressing, for instance, you mentioned it in passing, which is to make things look aged and not brand new. That's the worst thing, I think, sometimes when you're looking at a movie and their clothes look like they just bought them, and that's not what it's supposed to be. But that must take a lot of time. So how much time does distressing take, and how do you figure that into your schedule?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite, maybe my favorite thing of the like costume department, because dyeing,
Oh, really?
yes, changing a color and making sure the color is perfect for whatever we're doing, and working alongside the production designer and working with the DP and making sure we see what we're supposed to see, that the red comes through like it should, that it feels exactly correct. And I am a dyer myself. And so this is, again, if it doesn't work, I can go back and I can do it myself. If there's, no one is left in the studio, I love doing it. And then the actual like lived in quality, it is time, and it is picking the things that make sense for the world around. So like, that's why I'm so jealous of the DP and the production designer being in the scout van and like seeing what is the dust on the road? What is, what is the color and the quality of the mud around? So I often will ask for samples or just photos to, so I'm aware of what needs to be rubbed into the hems, because it just needs to make sense.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I think just as with anything else, it's just the communication aspect of it, that it needs to feel like it didn't step out. What you mentioned is it didn't come out from a store, but also that it didn't come out from a different state or country or a different universe, because it just needs to, unless that's the story, that there's, someone is from somewhere completely different, which is also fun. But just like especially, on HAMNET with Fiona's world, with the woods and everything, just to make sure that it felt real, and just that it doesn't make the audience, that you get like sucked in and you understand it is one whole, and you get to like watch it and understand it straight away. So a lot of time and a lot of people.
So it's very important for you to have that communication with, for instance, the production designer, because if you don't know what their plan is, you may be creating something that works in a completely different environment.
100%.
So how early do you get to talk with the production designer?
As early as possible. So I usually, whenever I start, very often on the movies, I start kind of towards the end, there's already been scouts happening. And so I try to send, whenever I do sketches and so on, I try to communicate straight away, just to make sure that, if there's red flags for them, they can see it ahead, that there's like, oh no, this is not, like this is going against what we've talked about. And obviously this is with the director as well. On HAMNET, for example, it was very interesting because I've not worked with Fiona nor Łukasz before, but
Mm-hmm.
Chloe sent us each other's this initial emotional response to the material. So we saw,
Oh.
I saw Fiona's and Łukasz's very early on before we started true prep. And it was
Mm-hmm.
so interesting to see how much on the same page we were from the get-go. So it was just
Oh, good.
it was just, it felt so, it was like, oh, we're friends. We're like already friends. We already know we're looking in the same direction. And we were talking all the time, especially with Fiona on this. This was, like every swatch, every time we would dye things, every time she found a blanket or, whatever it was, we would
Mm-hmm.
just communicate. And I think you can feel it
Mm-hmm.
on the screen that it's
Mm-hmm.
very, very cohesive. And
Right.
then on Train Dreams, Alexandra Schaller, the production designer, we're friends, we've worked together before. And so she would send me, in addition to like the official scout photos, which I always ask for, she would just, send me little notes or it was again like I was like the ghost in the scout van, that I tried to be there as much as possible, because I think what we miss as costume designers, it's not only what gets chosen, but we miss what is not chosen, what is like rejected. And I feel like that is
Yeah.
like such a good
Right.
moment of learning, both the DP and the director's like goals and visions, when you hear like, oh, this is not right, this grass is too
Mm-hmm.
straw colored, or whatever it may be. So I'm very jealous of that. But having, like making sure that we're talking all the time, it helps. It just helps.
I think another part that's really important in costume design that a lot of people don't really know about is that the actor finds their character sometimes through the costumes. This helps them find, who they are. But I always wonder, if you've had all this time and designed all these things and then get the actor in, and the actor has a very strong opinion that they wouldn't wear this, but they would wear that, how you work around that. Obviously, you probably have to be a diplomat, because you still have to, everything has to fit as a whole, not just for them, but as a whole. So can you tell us a little bit about that side?
Yeah, that's why I think for now we're safe with AI, because that part of it is is a big component of the job.
Yeah, right. That's a really
Very
good
good
point.
point. Yeah. I hope that's true.
Yes, as I'm saying that, I'm like,
Except when the actor himself or herself is actually AI.
Oh,
You're
well,
so right.
There,
Let's
right.
not go there anyway.
Another
You're very
conversation.
right. But again, I try to communicate. So when I come up with that, the emotional response, and then I go into sketches, when I then get connected with the actor, I try to share all that straight away. So they're aware again,
Mhm.
like they don't just see the dress, they see the thought process and how it fits in with the world. And of course it doesn't always work, or like everyone is on one page and suddenly it turns out that they look awful in whatever that like it just doesn't work. So
That is not their color.
yeah. So it's, you have to pivot and you have to think on your feet, which is kind of fun actually, because it's, I feel like if you know the world, then switching directions a little bit is not that big of a deal, because you're still moving within this universe that you're creating with your, with the DP, with the production designer, with the director. So there is like a roadmap of sorts. And it's kind of fun to discover the moments when like suddenly there's a light bulb in the fitting room that it's like, oh, what if we did this? And for example, with Jessie Buckley on Hamnet, she came in straight from shooting The Bride. And so she came in bleached blonde,
Yeah.
with painted nails, with this like raw, monster energy. And suddenly we were trying to do a fitting. And it was so interesting that she was like, oh, where am I? I'm not here yet, But as we were going forward with it, she got so in tune with Agnes, with the character of Agnes, that her body would respond whenever something was not exactly right. And it's not, and right in this instance means that it, like, if it didn't feel honest to her, like in a perfect way, her body just like, I don't know, there was like a physical response to it. So we all learned it, we're all like, oh, if this doesn't work, it doesn't work. There's no, you can't say like it looks good or it feels fine if you see someone like, So that was I've never worked with anyone quite as visceral as her. She was absolutely phenomenal. But sometimes it happens that, you make a plan and you talk about what you're going to do. And I remember I had an actor, we talked about like, he probably would have like soup stains on his sweaters. And, there's always something that is not perfect. And then we came to the final fittings and he was like, what is this? This is horrible. This looks awful. So, it's, you never know. But that's.
So did you have to change your whole concept then, that they wouldn't be messy?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And that was it.
Oh,
And
wow.
it just didn't feel right. So we had like little holes. We ended up doing like little moth holes rather than, soup. Which
right.
yeah. One day.
So does that mean when you have a fitting, you have your ideas of what you should be, but you have to have in the back of the closet other things that maybe are very different, but you could see how it could fit in.
Definitely.
So it makes you okay.
Definitely. Yeah. We call it the just in case rack, the JIC rack, which could be outside of the fitting room or, just like ready to go somewhere. So you're not getting an actor distracted, showing that too early. But I think it's always good to have a backup just in case, because you don't want to stop the conversation. If something doesn't work and you don't know where to go from there, then that you're wasting time. So just to have something that it's like, well, what if it was this shape or that shape, or, just to keep the ideas going. And then usually you can work through it.
I would think you would lose the trust of the actor also, because they go, oh, they don't know what they're doing.
Exactly.
They gave me something completely wrong.
Yeah. And to be fair, I always think like I don't know what I'm doing. So that is a natural state.
But do they ever come in with their own ideas? Like, I think I should wear this dress and it's not right at all?
Yes. But because we talk early on, or at least, it doesn't always happen, but I try to establish those contacts early on so I know what to expect. So if there's something that is like truly disastrous and I can't, it's kind of beyond my pay grade, I will get the director involved just because it's like sometimes you can't. But I've honestly, throughout my whole not super long career, I've been really, really lucky. And, the actors have been reasonable and have been creative, and the ideas that they were bringing into it, there was always a reason for it. And then maybe together we would figure out what is a compromise of sorts that makes them still feel, like they're bringing the core to it. And I, like you can't design without the actor, this is such a part of it that I try to respect. I don't exist in a vacuum. This is, with the actor, with the whole team, this is just one little part of it. So I am not precious about it.
So while we're talking about Hamnet, it would be interesting to go into a deeper dive into your choice of the costumes, both for Jessie Buckley and for Agnes and for Paul Mescal. I mean, the very subtle shifts, both characters, kind of very subtle shifts throughout the film. Can you sort of describe where you started from and how it developed?
Yes. And this camera angle is too high for that, but I made a t-shirt especially for this. I don't know if you can see.
I saw that.
So this is because both of their names are pronounced basically the same, Zhao and Zhal.
Backwards.
Oh, right. It is backwards, right? But yes, because I was dying to work with Łukasz as a fellow Polish person. So very happy that it finally happened. But it was the character of Agnes was my way in. And so starting with, at first when I was thinking about it, she is such a product of the woods that I was like, oh, is this, is she going to be in like browns and greens and kind of disappearing into the forest? But it would just make no sense. And she became more of a berry, more of a thing that like grew out of the woods. And especially that, her mom, she kind of treats the forest as her mother. This is where her mother came out of, and this is kind of where we feel she is connected to her mother still. So she, and her mother's name was Rowan. So there was like the berries and the reds came a little bit from that, but also from this undeniable like life that is in her. So she was this beating heart of the story. And when we as an audience see her through Will's eyes for the first time, when she's walking towards him, she is just this, this vibrant creature that he cannot turn away from. So those were, those very bloody reds, the oranges, the like a little bit of a poisonous berry situation, but also when she, when we see her in the first shot, when she is nestled in the roots of the tree, she does look like she just grew out of it, that she fits in there perfectly, even though she is not, leafy green. She's the opposite. She just is a product of it. And I will, this is like to toot my own horn here, the bodice that she's wearing in that first shot is actually made of bark cloth, which is wood. It is like wood fiber. So she's wearing a tree while, nestled in the tree. I was very, very, very chuffed by that. But her, she starts kind of...
Okay, I've just got to interrupt. So why that choice of material? I mean, do you think any member of the audience is going to notice it? Or is it something that you just feel is...
And Chloe probably liked it.
Everybody that's kind of knows it's there. I don't know. It's like Stanley Kubrick once getting a sort of historical manuscript from the British Museum for a shot on one of his films, and it turned up on set, and he opened a drawer of a cabinet and put it in. It never appeared in the frame.
But everybody knew it was
Everybody knew it was there.
Right.
It's two things. One is what Jessie felt, that she was kind of hugged by a tree in multiple ways. But even if you don't know what it is, the like fibrous texture of it does show. And so that was, we then moved, as we were moving through her other changes, we went to linens that just had a little bit of an embroidery that kind of mimicked a little bit of that fibrous nature. But the first one, it was just right. It was just, it just felt like, yes, this is her. And because she exists, in the world of Elizabethan England, but she is so her own creature that it felt like this was her little like punk, like a little not even a rebellious act, but she was just something else. And she was more of this world of the forest than off everything else. But yeah, coming back to the color, the color journey. So she starts so vibrant, then goes a little bit. We were talking a lot about blood actually, and how blood like rusts around the edges, how it turns into this, like a brick brown, orangey hue. And then as she loses her son, she loses that vibrancy, and so this blood, the like living blood, turns into a scab. So it's like purpley and gray and a little like a cooler brown and just lifeless. And then when she's going to London for the very, very end, she actually is reusing one of her previous dresses. So the dress that she's wearing at the Globe is the dress that she wears when she's the most brimming with life, when she's pregnant with the twins, and she looks like this giant red egg when she's like laced up, just this like giant red egg. And so in London, she's wearing that same dress, but closed up. So it's, it doesn't have that much life, but it has, she's coming, the blood flow is returning, so to speak. So she's like starting to turn it back into her original colors. And stop me if I'm rambling here, but with Will.
No, it's fascinating. Go on.
With Will, there was several things in that. One was starting from Fiona's work. The Shakespeare family, the house that we see, which I love that house so much. I know you're going to talk to her, or you did talk to her, but so we shot at Elstree. You stand on the lot and you see like a Tesco outside the walls of the studio, where actually that was where the Shining maze was, where the Tesco is today, which was also so weird to be there. But then you move 2 meters into this house and you are surrounded by history. And it was I've been on some beautiful sets, but this, just like going in and being in this house, in this world, and then stepping out and being, by the Tesco, it felt like such an incredible trip. So I loved what she did there. But the design of the house was very monochromatic. It was quite dark. There was very little color in there. And the whole of the Shakespeare family, they live with this very abusive father. And very honestly, when I read it first, I was so mad at Mary, the character played by Emily Watson, by the mother, at the mother, that she didn't stand up to her husband when he was threatening her kids. But then I was thinking, well, I'm judging her that she doesn't get physical or, just like shout. But of course, she loves her family. So what would she do kind of silently to protect her children? And so I thought one would be a color that does not provoke. So they all are on a grayscale, that they blend into the house. They are quiet. There's nothing, there's nothing that could provoke the father. And second part, which is not connected to color, but it's texture. So I thought which it goes with the Elizabethan fashion already, but I thought she would add a layer of padding to the kids' clothing. So there's a little bit of cushioning, there's a little bit of quilting in everyone's costume, just in case if there is a hit, that they are a little bit more protected. So this was her quiet rebellion against this violence. And so Will falls into that, except he is also, from the colors of the river, we have, the River Avon and Thames, and we see his connection to water. We see him process his emotions a few times, either by swimming or standing in front of the Thames with the to be or not to be moment. And so I added a little bit of green and blue, kind of diluted grayish blue and green into his, especially the initial looks. So he had a little bit of that, but still, when we saw Agnes come into that house for the first time, she looks like she's a volcano that just exploded there. It's like the house has never seen that amount of vibrancy in its life before. So that was a good, contrast. But Will starts in that grayish, greenish, bluish hue, and then his color then he goes a little bit darker, and then it gets more and more diluted, and the color kind of evaporates until he reaches that ghost moment. And I also looked at the ink that Shakespeare used. So it's called the Iron Oak Gall ink that Shakespeare made his own, but you can buy it. Of course, you can buy it in England. It's this, it comes in like delightful little bottles, like just from like a magical shop almost.
Right.
And so we diluted it into, just like looked at the colors that this gave us, because he always has his fingers stained. He has some stains on his clothing from that ink. And so his grays, in addition to the family story, his grays also come from that. And then his textures also, which was, I think, more important to me even. He, again, starting with the abusive father, the father has this necklace with a toothpick, which apparently was a thing people wore on their bodies. And then you could, just after dinner, just pick your teeth with this like bejeweled little object. But it is such
nice.
Exactly, we should bring it back.
That's quite unhealthy, really.
But I imagined that the father, and we see it, that he picks at him all the time. He just like picks at him. And so I thought, what if there was a physical, like a metaphorical outcome of it on his clothing? And so he starts in this scratched leather. There is he wears a quilted doublet, but underneath it there's a jerkin that is made out of a leather that looks like almost like the underside of a mushroom. And so it was kind of, I imagined it was from the fathers, those little jabs and paper cuts. But as we see him grow more and more frustrated, he's kind of stewing in his own pain, really. Before he moves to London, we see him change into this darker, thick leather doublet with the Elizabethan slashing, which is, that's a very traditional period detail. But I felt like for him, it was just an emotional, like just like showing his emotional state, that suddenly it's no longer the father, it's just like him growing those little slashes, and then gradually as he's in London after Hamnet's death, they turn into like giant gashes. His doublet is, there's huge slashes on it. It just these like silent screams. And then as he turns into the ghost, it is fully cracked. It's just cracked clay. So he slowly gives
That's
into
interesting. It's interesting that so you're taking quite a lot from historical reference.
Yeah.
But then the ghost, the ghost in the play, isn't it mentioned in Shakespeare's original play that he's actually in a suit of armor?
Yes. Yeah, so there's...
But you put him like he's in like a cloth, a shroud, a death shroud.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's two things there that we changed, and I've seen, because I did look at like how did other people do the ghost, like what is the sort of traditional language. And very often he is in presented as a more traditional ghost. But also the Hamlet is usually in black, and there is a line which was not in our chopped version of the play, but and now I'm totally blanking on it, but it was, yes, he is described as wearing black. And somehow we took a lot of poetic licenses in this movie, and those were some of them, and it just felt right for our story that Hamlet looked like Hamnet, like it was Will's memory of his son. And we had all the players, actually the whole cast of the players, this is not period correct. The people in the era would have pretty much worn the same clothing that the audience was wearing. Costumes were often donated by wealthy patrons, so it was just regular, modern to them clothing, which also meant that the audience like saw themselves on the stage and could connect in an easier way to the story. And for us, this doesn't work because we wear jeans and t-shirts, and there's already just such a time gap. So I thought, why don't we find something that connects us create a meta layer that somehow finds a place between us and them. And so we ended up using the Elizabethan shapes, but we built the costumes out of raw linen, and then we just painted them with latex paint. And so the Hamlet costume, I thought was a memory of, how Will would, in a very, very simplified way, try to portray his son, it's his memory of his son. And so it's going back to those colors, going like not even the shapes, but like kind of remembering what the colors were, which led to the use of the gold paint on his hair as well, that it was like a very simplified, like what did he look like, just like almost in a childish way, representing this memory. And it goes a little bit to that moment when we have the kids dressed up as witches in the scene earlier on at the house, which was, by the way, a last minute added scene. And I just cannot imagine.
Really?
Yeah, I cannot imagine the movie without it. But it was super last minute. And also...
You just happened to have the costumes in your truck.
Well, so that
they're pretty ornate. They're pretty amazing.
So Jessie wasn't aware what was happening. So when she opened her eyes, this is the first time she saw what was happening, because she did not know we were doing this. And
All right.
but what happened was I was doing what the kids would have done. So I was running around our department and the costume department and art department looking for things, to like, what can I put on? So it's just, a basket, a part of a beekeeping attire, and and it just, it
It's
was
great. Probably that's why it works so well.
Exactly.
It seems so sort of instinctive. Yeah. No, I was just really interested on research. I mean, how do you figure out what regular people of that time actually wore? Because until somebody like, I guess, Hogarth or something came along quite a bit later, you didn't actually have a lot of portraiture of normal people, and portraits were all of the, aristocracy, or those Duke of Marlborough or somebody, I don't know, whoever,
So there's a lot of the very, very stiff, poised, very lifeless portraits. And of course, the garments that have been preserved, it's those like precious, expensive, super, royal pieces. There's very little regular clothing, but it does exist. There was, what is the ship called? Not Penny Rose. Penny Rose? Maybe Penny Rose.
The Mary Rose.
Mary Rose. Penny Rose is a costume designer.
Yeah.
Right.
So there was, there were pieces that have been preserved on the ship in the mud, and you can kind of figure out what the boots were, or that's kind of, we definitely looked at stuff there. But the paintings that I was looking at were, I tried to find things that represented either peasants or farmers or shopkeepers, just to go deeper and see what people actually, like how the clothes were put together. And so the one painter that I didn't know about before was Sebastian Franck, who did these tableaus of very usually violent, actually, occurrences. There's, soldiers on horseback, and then people falling down and revealing all their layers, and like socks falling down, shirts open, sleeves rolled up. So for example, Will's costume and the way he wears his clothing was a little bit from that. And it was just they were like, well, people did roll up their sleeve. People did wear, it was, it's not like we need this, but it was kind of nice to see that we're not crossing any lines, really. We're just focusing on a different, just on a different vibe, really. And the witches, actually, when the kids started dressing up, I was like, well, when did we, because I thought, oh, maybe they need brooms. And then I started thinking, like, when did we start talking about witches as flying on brooms?
Right.
And it was, I think,
right. Well, actually, they were usually hanging people because they thought they were witches, rather than having kids fly on brooms.
But the first depiction of witches flying was, and now I think it's 1351, I think. There were two little illuminations. One was on a broom and one was on a stick. So both were, But yeah, research is so fun because you get to dig these, like that toothpick moment, that it's such a small thing, and yet it opened up this whole line of possibilities for me. So you just never know what you find. But I will say, because we talked about the fact that like not that much is preserved, but we got a call from Cosprop, one of the costume rental places in London, and they were like, "You guys should come in here." They knew we were going to pull some Tudor stuff, and it turned out that they opened a box that was closed for 100 years with
wow.
It was Victorian fancy ball costumes. So there was like a Robin Hood and just fancy outfits, and there was a doublet there that the people who had put it in the box 100 years prior must have thought it was built in their time as an Elizabethan doublet, but it was real. So I got to touch it, and I cried.
Wow.
It was just so amazing to just see the real thing. It was a tiny bit. I think they estimated it was 1620, so it was a little bit after us, but still, it was just such a beautiful. Like I'll never forget it. It was so special.
That's still old.
Yes.
Sitting here in America as we are, you would say that is still old.
Yes, quite old. Yes.
Do you think that some people are too strict when doing period pieces, and they don't have the flexibility? When something looks right and would work right, but it's 5 years after the period, we can't use it. I mean, would you be the person that says, no, it looks right, put it in?
I'm definitely that person, but I don't want to judge because it's, to each its own, and or to each their own. But I want the movie to feel alive, and I want the audience to be able to immediately understand it. And so it just needs to feel right. And that can mean so many things, but I want to make sure that I understand the period, that I can speak it. I know the terminology. I understand when we're straying away from it. And I'm sure there's purists who are going to be commenting negatively on the choices, because that always happens, and it's fine. But it's the same with Fiona's globe. It's it's much smaller than the real globe. It serves the purpose of our story, and actually the backdrop, because we talked so much about the painted aspect of the costumes and everything, and her backdrop. There were no painted backdrops at the time. I think she said in Italy maybe they started already, but not in England. So it was all, it's our movie, it's our story.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So what would it have been?
I don't know, actually. I don't know.
That's so interesting. I would never have expected that, because it just seems so right, the forest. But I was thinking it was a reference to a painting, a very specific painting by Utrello, actually, that I thought it was. But anyway,
no, so
it worked so great for the moment.
And I think it would just have been there from now that I'm thinking about it. I think there was just no backdrop. So I think it was just a bare stage with maybe some objects, but also the ropes, that did not exist. And I think I believe I heard Fiona talk about the fact that the backdrop is kind of that moment when Agnes's mother comes out of the woods from this little, that it's kind of referencing that it's this, this little negative space in this wall of green. Yeah, but I actually have, this is a piece of the backdrop right here.
Oh.
we got Chloe gave everyone as a wrap gift a tiny bit of the backdrop, which was very, very lovely.
Well, now when you do a different sort of movie like Maggie's Plan, for instance, that's more in the real world. How does your approach differ? Obviously, you don't have to do quite as much research.
Maggie's Plan or One More Time that you also did as well. Very contemporary. And
Maggie's Plan, I actually love the costumes in Maggie's Plan. And it was, in a very weird way, that was, I think, pushed further away from reality, the way I went about it, than Hamnet. Because when I started, and I never... and actually, it's the same production designer.
I got to say that Juliana Moore's character, right? She looks very pushed. Sorry.
But how it started, because it was so Alexandra Schaller, who was the production designer of Train Dreams. She got the job first, and she introduced me to Rebecca. And I sent in this lookbook that had like snowflakes and like frozen things, and like talking about Julian's character. It was just like cracked ice and like cherries surrounded with ice and just things like this. A lot of bird's nests and stuff like that. And she hired me despite this. There was like very few real clothes in there. And it was so helpful to me to have that, because then we could, push Julianne's character as this snow queen based on those, the textures and images that were in that initial lookbook, and just have fun with it. It was just so, I really, really loved working on that movie. And it was, so she was pushed kind of into a more fashion moment, but all
Right.
based on the frosty bits from the lookbook. And then Greta was as a Quaker, as this very practical character. All of her stuff was reused from other. It was like garments that have been like remade, skirts that were from dresses that were cut off, a menswear coat that was turned into a double-breasted women's coat. Like everything was kind of practical. She did not throw away a single thing. So it was just a lot of fun. I really, really loved working on that movie. But again, it helps to have the emotional arc and then go from there rather than, trying to figure out, what does she wear? It's just, who is she? And then go from that.
I imagine, again, in that case, you work closely with the actors to settle on the final costumes. And I was thinking also of, what am I thinking of? Sorry, You Were Never Really Here that you did with Joaquin Phoenix, who, I mean, from experience, I know he's fairly particular about his costumes and that. So how different was it working with somebody like that who's quite intense about his everything that he brings to the character? Yeah.
So it was, the goal of his clothing, of his costumes in that movie, was to make him disappear, to make him look as inconspicuous as possible. We did a lot of carpenter jeans and flannel shirts and a little bit of workwear, just so he was not noticeable if he walked on the street. And actually, when we started shooting, the first day we were shooting, we were out on the street. Nobody paid attention to him. So that was like, yes.
Oh, that's great.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. High five time.
But I wanted to make sure that it feels right. And we, when he came into the first fitting and he saw a few racks of jeans, he was like, no, you gotta be kidding me. This is too much. So that was the start, but it was just making sure that it felt lived in, and so we overdyed things, we softened them, beat them to shreds, not to shreds, but like just made sure that they feel that they've been worn forever and ever. And then the suit that he wears when he is, mourning his mother, and there's that whole scene at the lake, that was just, it was to pick something that has no fashion, that it kind of exists beyond trends. And also because Joaquin is vegan, just to make sure that all of, that there's no wool, that there's no leather, just like that we were, so it's like one vein of it is the character and one is the human, just to respect his
beliefs.
Exactly.
So do actors ever come in and say, oh, well, we should, and pull something from their closet and say we should use this? Which I would think might be a problem if they're in a rain scene or something, and you would normally get multiples of that costume.
Yeah.
It happens every now and then, but usually it's like, I usually will, send it, take a photo of it because I take photos of everything and then share it with the director, share it with the production designer, and share it with the DP. But if there's something that needs to be discussed, I'd like, of course, like I need to entertain this because maybe there's something, maybe we can remake it or but then if it's something that is like needs a bigger conversation, then I will involve the director and but there's, every now and then it's fine to have one, it's every now and then it works. And so, for example, in this is not from my experience, but Gosia Karpiuk, who was the costume designer on Zone of Interest, the dress that the girl who plays the piano, she wears a dress of this woman, of this actual person. They managed to get, so it's, if you have a miracle like this in your hands, of course you're going to use it. So it just depends like how well it fits in the story, and it's happened very rarely to me that I have an actor who is doing something for vanity reasons, So if there's like an emotional connection, then I feel like I need to respect it and kind of go from there and try to figure out what what is there that is the thing that matters. If it doesn't work, how can we figure out something else that will actually work for the whole? So just the diplomacy aspect, I guess.
And then you also worked with David Lowery on Ain't Them Bodies Saints,
Yes.
which is great.
And the Green Knight,
Yeah, and
which is
the
a
Green
very
Knight, yeah.
different movie.
Yeah, very different. But how did you find the costumes for Ain't Them Bodies Saints?
That was I think it was only my second feature. Well, I
Oh.
don't know, but it was the first time that I had a costume truck, and that was a big moment.
Exciting.
It was great. It was really and a teeny tiny team, but so I met David in Sundance. I didn't even meet him really. I saw his short called The Pioneer, which is phenomenal, and I just fell in love with it. And we didn't meet, but I would see him, Toby Holbrooks, and James Johnson just walking through the streets of Sundance or through the streets of Park City. This three characters, and at that point, David had a beard and he was bald, and I think he had a beard. Toby had like giantly long hair. James also had a beard, and so they just looked like this magical trio. And so I just started emailing him. I think they still had emails at that point in the Sundance catalogs. That was a long time ago.
Wow.
And I just started emailing him and just like, I want to work with you. I want to work with you. And then it happened. Well, because I heard that that Sandy Powell wrote like I guess letter at that point to Derek Jarman, and that it worked, So I was like, well, I feel strongly about this, so I will do this too. And it did work. And
that's great. That's great.
And so when David did hire me, we talked on the phone, and then he called me again, and he was like, "You can do this, right? You can do this." I was like, "I hope so."
And what did you say? Oh, yes, definitely. Or did you say, I think so?
I was like, I really hope so. But it was such a beautiful, my goodness, it was like one of my favorite shoots, hugely formative, just because I was learning on the job, but I was also going through a divorce at that time. So I was like processing a lot of my own, stuff. And this was so healing. And, I love all those people. I'm still, we're friends. This was, and Jade Healy and our production designer, and, the amazing Bradford, and just, it felt, yeah. And I met my husband, Joe Anderson, who's also a DP. I met him on that shoot. So it was, it's like a very,
so it was a good shoot.
All right.
But again, a tiny, tiny budget. And so, it is set in the 70s. We used as much vintage as we could, but there's also so many multiples. So it was kind of finding things and making them feel like they belong to this world. This was, I learned about a thing called otter wax, which is this like soap bar. It has nothing to do with otters. I don't know why it's called that. It's just this like greasy, plant grease of some sort that you can condition leather with. But if you put it on denim or on fabric, it just looks like you've been wearing it forever. And so that was a lot of the time spent. I spent just like rubbing this into all the costumes to just like make it feel like it's been there forever. And especially in a story like that it is such a, it's a story that happens then, but it feels like it's been told over and over again, that it's kind of an archetypal story of sorts. So the clothing did need to feel like it was there for a while as well.
Sounds like you really like to be hands-on.
Very much.
You kind of working with a small team and actually, doing the aging yourself and finding these little techniques yourself seems to be what gives you the most joy.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Do you think that you've done a good job if people don't walk out of the theater and go, wow, those were great costumes. That they don't, because they're so into the story and you fit so well into the story. Would you say that?
Yes, that's exactly it. And also it goes even further for hair and makeup. On Hamnet, for example, our hair and makeup artist, hair and makeup designer is Nicole Stafford. And, it looks like nothing, but they are so in that world. They have like the texture. It's so fantastic, but you don't see it. She just does the magic by making it completely invisible and so ingrained into the world that like no one notices. I think on Green Knight it was a little bit more pushed. There was more fun, I guess. I don't know, the costumes were more fun, but yes, they are as subtle as possible. And then there's those that then end up on Halloween. People end up dressing in those costumes or dressing their dogs.
Yeah.
I saw dogs dressed as Gawain, and yes, so
Yeah.
so that's a different kind of success,
Yeah.
Oh, good.
So I'm really interested. When you started out, we got to you being on a film set with Aneska, but then you went to New York, right? You went to Tisch.
Yes, yeah.
Why that choice? Was that just an obvious choice? Was it easy to do that, to make that shift?
No, it was. Well, I mean, it wasn't. I always, when I was very little, when I was a teenager, I lived in the United Arab Emirates, then moved back to Poland, and then went to school in Prague. And I always found it easy to find a new place, and I like moving. Now I'm like itching to go somewhere else because I've been here now for 19 years, so it's been a while. But my partner there in Prague, also a DP, he shot, oh my God, Ben Zeitlin's Beasts of the Southern Wild. Now he's a director. But yes, I've had cinematographers have been a substantial part of my romantic life.
I see. Right. Okay.
But at that point, Ben was working on an animation in Prague, and then he worked in fashion also, and he would do a lot of like retouching for shoots in New York and going back and forth more and more often. And then we were like, well, should we just try to go there? And I started looking for schools and honestly Googled like best costume program in New York, and that was one of the ones that came in, and they accepted me. So I was like, okay. So it's
no question then.
And if it didn't happen, I would have figured out another way, but it just kind of, it made it possible. And I loved that program dearly. I learned so much there. And again, it was mostly a theater design program, but the professors were so generous and so genuinely deeply involved in sharing. It was fantastic. So I go back a lot to the students there because I feel like there's, it's called the design for stage and film, but the film part is still kind of the secondary one. So I do, I do like little guest classes and all to just be like, we're also here. This is also a career path,
Yeah. Well, but once you left Tisch, I mean, was the path into working on film?
How did you get work?
Yeah, I mean, was that easy or difficult? I mean,
it was terrifying. And it's, again, and as I go back to school now to the student, especially the students who are finishing the third grade, I still feel what I felt when I was leaving school, because it's, you have no idea what's going to happen. And also I heard a director recently I don't remember who it was, but he said, I finished school and I sat there and I was waiting for the president of Hollywood to call me. And that's kind of what if you're like, I did it, I passed all the exams, like that's it. And then there's nothing. So there was a little bit of that, but also because I had been working throughout school, I've been doing shorts, I've been, doing commercials, I've been trying to do whatever I could. I did have people who knew that I was capable. And so, those little jobs did and a lot of it was just for free. And this is a shout out to my first husband, Ben Richardson. He very kindly supported me through the no paying fake commercials and all that. And this is what I'm telling students all the time now. You have to make those connections when you can. So then the people who now suddenly get a short film, they will need a costume designer, they will need a production designer, and the only person they know is you. So great. So but so I just I did Glory at Sea. I think we shot through while I was still in school, and so that I just like learned on the job. I never really assisted, which it means till right now that every time I do a bigger movie, it's the first time I've done a movie of this size. So I'm learning, I'm sure I'm reinventing the circle over and over again, but that's somehow what that's it's too late now to go and assist.
Yeah,
so,
right.
That's kind of what happened. Yeah. And this is why it helps to know how to sew or to know how to age things if you're like a one-man job for shorts, and then to build your portfolio from there,
Yeah.
Yeah. Good advice.
Yeah. Good. All right.
Yeah, very good. Great.
Well, thank you for doing this. This has been really interesting. It's been great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
If you'd like to sponsor the Team Deacons podcast, let us know at pod@teamdeacons.com. Thanks for listening. If you want more information and further discussion, check out the forums at www.rogerdeacons.com. Becoming a member is free, and you can ask follow-up questions there. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more new questions and topics. Also, check us out on Instagram at team.deacons. See you next time.